My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab.
The topic is what is technical sales? What do we mean when we say technical sales? What does it look like for Daily Thermetrics?
So we're one of two companies under the Daily Instruments brand. So like I said earlier, Thermal Control does aerospace, Department of Defense, that type of thermocouple instrumentation, temperature instrumentation, and we do the broader process industry. So cut our teeth in refining, but over the last 20, 30 years, really branched into LNG, midstream, petrochemical, renewables, really the instrumentation that goes throughout the plant, from really kind of standard monitoring stuff to all the way up to extremely critical safety instruments. So that kind of stuff is right in our wheelhouse.
This content is brought to you by the TIES Sales Showdown. That's the Technical, Industrial, and Engineering Student Sales Showdown, hosted right here at Texas A&M University. We have over 200 engineering students taking sales classes every semester and a growing minor program in technical sales. These students are smart enough for STEM and savvy enough for sales, and the TIES Showdown allows them to demonstrate their selling skills in a role-play competition where industry partners, like you, serve as judges and provide them coaching feedback. If you're hiring for technical, industrial, or engineering sales roles anytime in the next couple of years, this is an event you can't miss. You can learn more at tx.ag/TIES. That's tx.ag/TIES. Hope you can join us.
And the common core here is temperature.
Yep. So it's just temperature, and that's something that does, we stand out a little bit in regards with just our scope of supply being temperature. So, in our space, there's gigantic mega corporations that are just broad instrumentation companies that do flow, that do level, that do pressure, that do radar, that also do temperature. And they're very skilled at all of those things, but we've said no to all the other level or all the other genres of instrumentation that are used inside these plants to become absolutely deadly and experts in the temperature instrumentation space, because it's such a critical piece that these refiners use, or these LNG operators, whatever the plant operators use to control their process, not only from a safety standpoint, right, but also from a market efficiency standpoint. It's all about taking some sort of feedstock. It goes in the reactor at one end, it comes out the other end, either as a final product or on its way to be further refined or further converted into something. And temperature is an absolutely essential piece to make sure that equipment's running safely, that conversions are happening, that they're ultimately making money, right? That they can bring a product to market to their customers, because they have obligations and contracts that they fulfilled, and they're relying on their vendors to make sure their plants are running safely, and that we're giving them instrumentation that's going to able to facilitate that entire process. The sales organization within our space, or within industrial sales, Daily is unique, I would say, mainly in the sense that we put a tremendous amount of emphasis on our salespeople being extremely technically sound. The way that I manage my sales team, and then the other managers in our different areas of the global market manage their teams, are the salespeople are really the first filter between the customer and our inside team, or between Daily as a whole and the customer. So technical questions are vetted first by the salesperson right there in the plant, or in the engineering company's office, right? So being able to provide sound technical advice, technical guidance to these operators, to our customers, with just the salesperson, is a huge advantage for us. And it allows us to get ahead of our competition by, instead of having to say, oh, well, let me check on that, I can put you in contact with someone that knows that answer. They can give it right there and provide immediate, on the spot guidance and advice, resource, whatever the case may be, to lead to a sale. Because a lot of our sales, at least when we're talking about doing technical sales at the plant level, a lot of it is based on, okay, you're right here. Can you provide a solution right now? Can we go out in the field and look at it right now? If that salesperson is competent and confident to go out and do that, they're ultimately going to get the sale. So we really preach to our sales team before they even go out in the field to understand how these refining process units work, or these LNG plants or these chemical plants work, how they're using temperature, to understand the mindset that a lot of our customers have from a really technical standpoint, being what are they doing with the data that our temperature devices are giving them to ultimately run their plants, and to have that mindset and how our stuff works integrated with their system, unit specific stuff, things like that, really gives us an advantage rather than us being kind of a middleman and doing the business side of things. Like, I can put a quote together for you. Sure. We want to be able to say, I can solve that problem for you and be a direct part of your team, really an extension of your technical team. I can also provide a quote for you and make a sale, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. But really, our first goal when we're having these sort of conversations with any customer is to establish confidence that they should establish confidence in us and in Daily as a whole in our technical capabilities, because our product, they can get our product at a variety of different vendors, but they can't get our expertise. And that's what really sets us apart. And, we're not the most, we pride ourselves in being a high quality product, which doesn't always translate to being the cheapest product, but the customers are paying for the salesperson's expertise right then and there, and the confidence that they have in what we're able to give them. So if you're asking for like what a day in the life of the technical salesperson is at Daily, it varies depending on where the need is. So we have a loose guide for each of our regions. So Daily's divided up into Western and Eastern Hemisphere, just to do a microcosm to focus on one specific region. So we'll do the Houston ship channel, right here in our backyard. Our salesperson that has the Houston ship channel region has key accounts, right? There's hundreds of chemical plants. We've got maybe 40 or so that are identified as, hey, these are ones where we want to establish them as like Daily flagship plants. So we'll give them kind of a loose guideline of a monthly plan for, these are accounts that we want to make cold calls at. These are accounts we want to be involved at. These are accounts where we have active projects at. But each of our salespeople, they have a true sense of their territory as their small business, or their ability to grow is totally dependent on their sense of ownership, their sense of drive to kind of go out there and make those calls and facilitate interactions with the customer. So each day kind of varies, right? You can have things where we have customers where we're doing a lot of work, and you roll up there in the morning and you meet with some of their control systems engineers to walk through all their cubicles and say, hey, what projects do you have coming up? Hey, that order that we helped you out with last weekend, how's that working? The thing we did for you earlier this morning, how's that working? I heard you had a failure of this unit, whatever the case may be. We're starting to plan for projects for 2025, 2026. You already kind of have that familiar relationship with them. But then we have other accounts where, they're totally green, and we have to figure out, okay, well, what's the best way to break into that particular account? And that's where saying, well, we know it is an epoxy plant, right? So we know what that type of unit's going to do. Let's try to figure out what that licensor, the technology provider for that plant, what they specify for temperature instrumentation. And then we have a little more information, a little more working knowledge. So when we make a cold call to that plant, it's not just, hey, I'm Joe from Daily, can I come by and bring some donuts? It's, hey, I know that your plant is this license. So like this technology provider, for context, a licensor is like, if you think about a phone, Apple is a licensor, Android's a licensor. They're both phones, but they have different kind of nuances, right? The same thing for the oil and gas space. There are a lot of ways to make gasoline, right? Different licensors have different unique tweaks, right, that facilitate that process.
Okay.
Just for some context. So that way, maybe the salesperson then has to think about a creative way to break into that particular account. They do some cold calls. Maybe they find some folks on LinkedIn and they're literally calling the 1-800 line for the plant saying, hey, can I speak to so-and-so? They say, hey, I found you. I want to talk to you about something really specific instead of just like a generic, hey, I'm your sales guy rep. And then there are also opportunities where in the day in the life where a customer calls you and it's 4:30 on a Friday and they're saying, hey, we had an issue at the plant. We need somebody from Daily out here to help us troubleshoot this particular situation. We don't know what we're doing. Can you have someone come out here? The salesperson is the one that's fielding that phone call. And
Yeah.
if they want to make the sale, they say, I can be out there. So all of our salespeople also have the safety training, the necessary safety equipment, hard hats, steel toe boots, FRCs, and then the confidence through our training program to go out and to look at any sort of process unit with the customer and provide that confident technical advice at any time of day. I mean, I've driven out to plants at 3 a.m. where they called me during night shift and said, hey, how quickly could you be here? I was like, well, Port Arthur's 2 hours away. I can be there at 6. And then I've had folks FaceTime me when they're in a big unit and they're like, I'm looking at this thing. What do you want me to do? Right. And so the salesperson, for a day in the life of what it's like, it totally varies. It is all geared towards customer service and making a sale. You have to really look at each account and like doing your research. And that's where the team comes in with the RM or the regional manager and giving them a little background saying, hey, we're really strong at that account. We're not really strong at this account. Let's figure out how to bring both up. Right.
Sure.
It's not like where we give you a cold call list and we say make 500 calls this month. We're going to check your quote at the end of the day. It's totally varied by the territory, by the day, and by really like what the market conditions are and what's going on inside your territory in terms of projects and outages and things like that.
Well, and you mentioned, kind of being an extension of the customer's team.
Absolutely.
And so that's, that's really the picture you're painting there, as I hear it, right? Hey, I've got this guy who I can call when everything hits the fan and when we need to troubleshoot something, when we need a solution. And you're almost like the, you're the landlord, you're the
Yep.
fixer, right?
That's a great way to describe it as the fixer. And I think our most successful salespeople, the way that their customers perceive them is I can call or text Joe or call or text Aaron or Triple or whoever and I can say, hey, I need this. And we're going to follow through. We're going to make it easy for them. It's going to be right. It's going to be on time or early. And if there are hiccups, if there's, we understand we all live in the real world, things go wrong, right? We're going to be proactive with the solution. We're not just going to come with a problem or, it's 4:30 on a Friday, I got to clock out. Our salespeople are truly the customer's advocate to our inside team, as well as an extension of the customer's technical team for temperature.
Yeah, so really those organizational boundaries are kind of blurred. They're probably living in a bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of what it takes to make the sale and to build up the salesperson's personal brand within the territory, because they're the face of daily, but the daily experience at a certain plant might be different than a different one that at a different plant, just based on who they're used to working with, right? So the salesperson, it's in their best interest to, hey, what can I do to get into this plant? And if we suddenly randomly had an order and the plant's in your backyard, we've had salespeople, where you're talking about job responsibilities get blurred. They say, hey, let me grab that order and I'm going to hand deliver it as an excuse to go talk to these people. Anything you can do to kind of maybe get 1 to 2 to maybe 3% better than what the competition's doing to stand out. Yeah, our salespeople are naturally going to gravitate towards that. That's something we kind of install in all of our salespeople when we have our training with them, and then in the type of candidates that we're looking for, the folks that are going to start to think, okay, what edge can I find, and what can I do to be better prepared than my competition, especially when we know who our competition is, especially in our industry where it's maybe 1 to 2 to maybe 3 known competitors, usually 1 or 2. We kind of know their game plan and their playbook, right? So we can understand what we can do to stand out in a good way with the customers.
That's awesome. Well, and you've mentioned a couple times the inside team or the internal team there at Daily. And when you started talking about that very early in the call, I thought you were going to say that the technical salesperson at Daily is sort of the translator between the inside team that's maybe doing the real engineering and the real technical work and the customer. But then you kind of said, but no, actually you defied my expectations. You said, well, actually the salesperson has to be the expert as well and be able to solve the problem. So what is the inside team doing? They're just more technical, or what does that look like?
So the inside sales team, and that's a great a great question about what they do and the way that our system is sort of set up. So we have inside sales teams that are responsible for generating the quotes, and then they're sort of the interface between our vendors, so our raw material vendors, and then our actual production shop. So the reason that we need to have our technical salespeople so competent when they're relaying the information for a request for quote from the customer to the inside sales team, one is largely due to the volume of quotes that we do. And then, one of the things that we can do to stand out is how quickly we can get a quote back to a customer. So one way to help ensure that that can be done in just a matter of hours in certain cases, maybe just minutes, depending on what we're doing, is when we first relay that information from the customer to the inside salesperson, they're relaying that to the inside sales team. That is right the first time. So we don't have to worry about doing Rev 1, Rev 2, doing it back and forth with a bunch of questions. So the inside sales team's role is to work with the outside salesperson in terms of giving them a quote and a lead time. So a lot of our products, not a lot, all of our products are made custom. So we just stock the raw materials. We make everything to order depending on what the application is, what the customer needs. Just because of the variety in our business, that's the best way to approach a lot of these applications. So the outside salesperson will get an RFQ, they'll hash out all the details, they'll get everything they need for a quote. They'll bring that information to the specific inside sales department's inside sales team. So we have different engineering departments based on what product category we're working in the plant. They all have their own inside sales team. And the outside salesperson will communicate to the appropriate inside sales team, hey, here's who the end user is, here's what they need, here's when they need it, and then here's some special caveats depending on the project. Like we got to ship it to this particular overseas fabricator, whatever the case may be. And the inside salesperson says, okay, cool. They work with our internal sort of database for inventory, our pricing structures, our labor, our raw material prices. They have to take into account corporate MSA pricing that we have with a lot of major refiners. So keeping all of those specific agreements in place, and they present to the outside salesperson, hey, here is the quote, here's the lead time, or here's the price at list price. And then the outside salesperson, the inside salesperson will kind of have a little back and forth on, hey, here's the situation. We want to extend X amount of discount, or, hey, actually the customer just called me and they need this faster than 2 weeks. They need it on site tomorrow. And so the inside salesperson is crunching the numbers to actually populate the quote and give them the price based on everything that we have. Then the outside salesperson delivers that to the customer and then kind of helps facilitate the PO process, right? So the inside sales team, they're absolute rock stars at putting together these very detailed quotes that in certain instances, working with our material vendors to make sure that we have stuff on the shelf to actually build and give accurate quotes, accurate lead times. And then once it becomes an order, we have an inside sales team that communicates with our shop floor to make sure that things get released to the production center on time, things get shipped on time. All the while, the outside salesperson is kind of checking in, depending on the criticality and like the importance of the order is, hey, has this been done yet? Or, hey, when can we expect this? I want to relay this information to the customer. So that's kind of the interface between the inside team and the outside team. Usually all of the communications with the customer is done through the outside sales representative. The inside sales team kind of keeps everything internal and then facilitates everything to the world, to the customer through the outside salesperson. So it's sort of a partnership between the outside sales and the inside sales people. They talk every single day. I know folks on my team specifically kind of have bookend meetings where Monday morning they go over, hey, these are open RFQs that I have. This one's the most important, or this one's the most important, or this one had a change in status. Then they have a Friday bookend meeting where they go over everything that they did that week, things that they need to do next week, some things that may be changed, right? So that they have the latest information. So it's really a partnership relationship that, if you think about it in another way, the outside salesperson can kind of treat the inside sales team as like another customer for them to kind of, get to know, understand how they work best together, understand their needs, and maintain a good relationship,
influence,
right?
And reality,
Because the outside salespeople, we don't make our own quotes. We can give ballpark pricing, based on what we know about the material and the spec and the lead time, but we don't have the jurisdiction to actually make the quotes. So if you want to quote really fast, on time, you want to bump to the front of the line. It kind of helps to have a good relationship with that inside salesperson. So
Absolutely.
all of those things kind of come into play. But that's kind of in a roundabout way what the inside sales team does and how they interact with the outside sales team. But extremely critical piece of the puzzle, like absolutely essential.
And are these weird temperature devices behind you? What are these guys doing?
Yeah, so these are if you think about, oh man, I don't know how far into the weeds you want to go, but to keep it really broad level. So inside these process plants, there's maybe hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline where crude oil, for lack of a better term, is moving through as it gets further refined and turned into gasoline or jet fuel or whatever the case may be. So they can't just stick in a temperature sensor, which would be probably the size of the pen or in terms of the diameter. Yeah. Some of the flow rates moving past inside these process lines could be hundreds of feet per second, right? So these things are they're called thermal wells. So it's a piece of just metal, right, with a process connection, be it a flange or a threaded connection, that has very specific geometry to accommodate for the flow patterns that go past it. And this is actually what sticks into the process line or to the vessel, if that's what you're monitoring. And then inside this, so if you think about, this is a better example to show, but it's open. So inside something like this is where you stick your temperature sensor, and the flow is actually moving past this, and your temperature sensor is down here. So this is sort of, think about this as just purely protection for the instrument that's giving you the temperature data, which would be like a thermocouple or a bimetal gauge, something that you would see on your barbecue pit, right? So these are things that we make for a variety of applications throughout the process industry, process lines, used extensively in our industry. And they're really closely governed in terms of how they're designed, how they're fabricated. Certain end users have really strict requirements on where we source the raw material because they have such a stringent requirement list. There's a lot of design work that goes into something like this. I would say, we do a significant amount of our business, so much so that we have a department set up to just these types of products, standard process line temperature measurement systems. But in the world of temperature measurement for the process industry, when you start getting into where the reaction actually takes place to make a product, that's where the instrumentation becomes even more critical, because it's a super high temperature, high pressure application in certain situations. And temperature is one of your only feedback systems from a safety standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint. So the temperature systems that go into those units are way more involved than something that you see here, but still equally important in terms of the design. And then we also support fired equipment on the facility. So you have to heat up all of this process to a certain temperature before it goes into the reactor. And so we design and install a lot of the instrumentation to monitor the mechanical temperature, the temperature of some of the mechanical components in these heaters, namely the tubes, to make sure they don't essentially rupture. Because if you look inside, if you Google process refinery heater, you'll see essentially a jet engine blowing, heating up some of the temperatures inside these units to 900, 1,000 degrees F. And then there's like rows of tubes on the inside that's holding the process, which is just whatever fluid media is in there, to heat it up to a certain temperature before it goes into the reactor. And so we sell the equipment to monitor the temperature of those tubes, which again is a whole nother can of worms. Each of those departments are unique within Daily because of the customizable nature of each of these products, and then the uniqueness of the application. And that kind of leads into, from the salesperson's perspective, our sales team, the reason that we put a lot of emphasis on them being technically sound is because of the variety of application inside the process industry where temperature instrumentation is used. You have to understand thermal well design and wake frequency calculations. You have to understand how to loosely route a reactor multipoint inside of a hydrocracker. You have to understand the best routing for a tube skin thermocouple in a coker furnace. And when you're sitting down with the instrument engineer from Valero across the table from you, and they're expecting to see just a salesperson, right? And they see someone that is very detailed and understands the application that they're working with, how temperature instrumentation works into their scope of work, what works, what doesn't. They understand the corporate specs maybe better than the operator does. That's all going to build credibility, and all that stuff kind of culminates into a better sale. And a better experience for the customer. But that's why we do kind of put a lot of emphasis on the technical training for our salespeople before they even go out into the wild. We have like a 90-day training period of making sure they really understand the process, the industry, our products, how they're made and designed. And then the last portion that we do is really focusing on how to sell them based on who we're talking to. And one of the cool things that I wanted to bring up about Daily in terms of the sales training experience that we give is the opportunity for them to travel globally to support and get training for installations for our products. So we have folks that routinely go. We have a department, I should say, that is exclusively responsible for the installation of our products around the world. And we have our salespeople shadow them during these installation exercises, more so than just being kind of a warm body. They actually get their hands dirty. They get inside the reactor, inside the vessel, to understand how our products go from the design phase here in the manufacturing phase all the way through installation, to better communicate that. And then also give them an opportunity to see the world. And so I spent 2 weeks in Antwerp, Belgium, installing reactor multi-points. I've been all over the world or all over the nation from coast to coast. We have salespeople that spent, a month in Cartagena doing an installation and really getting involved in the culture. And that gives you an opportunity to really feel like, the work that you're doing, we just do temperature instrumentation, but you're working on these global projects that have an impact on global energy supply. And that's something that's really kind of been an unintended reward or benefit of the job, is that sense of satisfaction of really kind of being a key component in the energy production, and then the energy transformation, which is kind of big now with renewables, having a key role and a leading role in that in a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, what's funner than getting to go out and see big cool things and get involved and get a glimpse into some of these things that for most of us are, black boxes, right?
Yeah.
I know there's crude oil. I know there's gasoline. I don't know what happens in between.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, and I didn't always. So I grew up in Corpus Christi, which is another hub for the process industry.
Yeah.
And I remember always seeing like Citgo and Flint Hills and Valero and being like, man, what's going on? Like, there's just a bunch of lights over there. There's a bunch of towers. It looks cool. No idea what's happening behind that. I just knew that, like, when I go to the gas station, I have gasoline in my car. We've got plastics. We've got all the stuff that comes from a barrel of crude oil that we can make. It's really amazing. And then when I went to A&M, kind of how I got into technical sales and how I found Daily was, I don't have an engineering background. I don't have a technical background. I was an English rhetoric major. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I was terrible at math. And I found Daily through a career fair at A&M and was like, man, this sounds like a really cool opportunity. I definitely felt challenged and maybe a little over my skis in terms of, oh man, what did I get myself into? But all of that was kind of a credit to what the company does in terms of preparing their salespeople and making sure that they're really technically sound and what we're looking for a technical sales candidate. We're going to make sure that we teach you what you need to know about the process industry, about our products. We have probably the best global leaders in terms of temperature instrumentation for the refining, LNG, petrochemical space in the world, without a doubt, 100%. So we'll make sure that our salespeople have a technical opportunity or an opportunity to become as technically sound as they want. Continuing education, we're going to make sure that they have the ability to learn. So that really we're less concerned about when we're hiring someone or we're looking for a technical salesperson. What we're looking for are really like a sense of ownership, right? If you see something, you want to get it done. You're not going to wait around to be told what to do, and a drive, a competitiveness. And then one thing that we really stress is like being comfortable under pressure, being able to effectively communicate clearly to a variety of different people, different disciplines. To go back to the day in the life, one day you may be meeting with somebody that is fresh out of college, an instrument engineer at Exxon sitting across the desk from you that has no idea what temperature is. And then later on that day for lunch, you're meeting with the instrument group lead at a major refinery that's going to ask you some very critical questions about a piece of equipment, right? And so you have to be able to be confident in your communication with both of them. And so when we're hiring someone, we want someone that's coachable and that has that confidence or the ability to communicate. And we place a lot of stress on presentations, on technical sales skills in terms of communicating really complex topics, kind of boiled down to something that's really distilled and simple for people to understand, but also can, parse it out as detailed as they need to be. So it's not necessarily like we're looking for mechanical engineers, we're looking for technical people. That is a huge leg up for sure. But we're really looking for sort of those soft characteristics, right? And that ability to learn as being a really key critical aspect, because the job itself is, in my opinion, it is one of the best jobs out there, not only from an earnings perspective, but also from a personal sense of growth and impact. On yourself personally, you'll have the opportunity to do a lot of cool things, but also the impact you have on the company. It's not uncommon for some of our salespeople, depending on the region that they're in or the region that they're going to grow, to have 10 to 15 to 20% revenue, or be responsible, I should say, for 10 to 15 to 20% of the bookings of the company. And you might be the salesperson that is like, yeah, I'm plugged into what's going on in my territory. I can forecast we're going to do X amount of millions of dollars here. And that has a real impact on the trajectory of the company, allows us to make decisions to invest or whatever the case may be. And you can do that that's what our salespeople have at a very early stage in their career. They're not going to spend, 3 years, 4 years exclusively doing cold calls or exclusively doing quotes. They're going to have the ability to make an impact right out of the gate. And so that's why we do look very, very hard for the right people to hire, because we think it is such an excellent job and an excellent opportunity where you have an immediate impact, not only personally, but also on the company itself. The salespeople are a real critical aspect.
When it comes to the customer's perspective, would you say most of the time you're solving problems that have already occurred? Most of the time you're putting something in place to prevent problems? And then maybe give us an idea of, like, in a really detailed, concrete way, what those problems are, right? Because I imagine you don't talk to the customer and they say, hey, I want to monitor the temperature for the hell of it, right? So sure. What is it that's really driving this as a need?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I would say some of our best opportunities are where a customer has called and said, hey, I have had one of these thermal wells or something in my unit failed. Something broke. We had a serious incident, not a serious incident in terms of loss of life, but like it failed. We had to shut down the unit. It cost us X amount of millions of dollars an hour to be down for production. So a thermal well that maybe costs $800, in our mind, it's like, okay, it's $800. Well, in their mind, it's no, we are down 3 days to replace it. We had to mobilize, crews to do the labor to get it out, put a new one in. You're talking about millions of dollars in product, right? And time lost. Everything in the refining industry and the energy industry is how quickly can we do something to minimize our delays in production. So a lot of our best opportunities, to answer your question, are, hey, this thing failed, or this thing broke, or this thing routinely breaks. Like, we're just living with the pain of having to replace it every 3 to 6 months. We want to see if we can't fix that, right? And so when we ask a lot of our salespeople when they're meeting somebody, the way that we want to prove ourselves and cut our teeth is, hey, what is the thing out here that breaks routinely that you guys just cannot come up with a way to make it work, right? What's your hardest application for temperature? Because I promise you that someone in our facility, someone in our organization has seen what that particular refiner or plant is experiencing 3 times already that year, right? Yeah. Just because of the global reach that we have and then the experience that we have at the top of our team. So most of our best interactions, I would say, come from, hey, this thing broke, or we're just sick of having this thing. It fails all the time.
It's a persistent problem, yeah.
What can we do to fix it? And, there's depending on who you're talking to at the plant, there's some folks that are like, hey, this has worked for 20 years. We replace it every 8 months, and that's just fine. But then you have some people that are like, every 8 months, that you can map that out and see what the impact is from an economic standpoint. So I would say maybe 50% of the business is, hey, this thing keeps routinely breaking, or hey, this thing broke all of a sudden. We need it as soon as possible. That's a huge aspect of the business that drives a lot of our interactions and our problem solving. The other half would say, and a specific example, or I should say, before we get to a specific example, the other half of the business is, hey, we're planning on increasing the amount that a specific unit is going to make, and that requires having more temperature data points for us to understand what's happening inside the reactor. Or something that's like, something that's new and has gained momentum over the last 4 or 5 years is renewable industry. So everything that we've been talking about usually is like we're taking crude oil that we get at from West Texas or wherever and turning crude oil into traditional products you might be familiar with, gasoline, jet fuel, whatever the case may be. But the feedstock, the main source is crude oil.
Yeah.
There's been a wave recently where they want renewables in an effort to be cleaner in terms of the emissions that they produce. So taking things like used cooking oil or soybean oil or wood chippings or, manure in some instances, right? Converting a feedstock into something that would be that's a biofuel, right? So sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, that has been a huge big ticket item for these operators to make a lot of money on and to meet certain regulatory demands. But they have no idea how it's going to impact the temperature instrument, how to run these units, right? The feedstock is way different. So where we come in there is, we're sort of a leader in, hey, okay, well, what's your feedstock? It's high in a certain chloride. We would recommend this metallurgy or we recommend this point layout, right? And, we're having these elevated conversations for projects that are maybe 10 years down the line, or we're anticipating the energy sector shifting into a certain style of feedstock, right? Or a certain wave of whatever the case may be. But we're at the forefront of those conversations, designing our instrumentation to fit whatever the next wave of feedstock is going to be. So with renewables, just for context, like we've been involved and have won 80 to 85% of all of the renewable jobs globally. And that has just been from how we're positioned with a lot of these licensors, with these end users, and providing that expertise. But those are all things that have not been built yet or being built now. And we're kind of helping write the spec for a lot of those. Whereas the other half of the business is, hey, this thing broke. What can we do to fix it? And so those are kind of the two avenues, and what that looks like in a concrete example. Or where a salesperson was involved, maybe in fixing like an headache is, a gigantic LNG plant in Louisiana. They had a thermocouple, so what goes in here, designed for a certain application. Let me just put this so it doesn't roll. Designed for a certain application that had a very certain distance on it. And, they can't start up these units until all of the holes are filled. So all of the flanges everything has to be bolted up before they pressure test it and start running.
Yeah.
And so they had, we're talking about grassroots $billions plant. And they had some thermocouples that they ordered, that, on paper, everything looked good when they were designing it from the engineering standpoint. Hey, rubber stamp, build it, go ahead and ship it. But when they actually went to the construction phase, what they found out was where, if you think about this, for example, where this was supposed to bolt up and this sticks out maybe 5-6 inches, there was a giant I-beam or a steel beam running right here that was preventing them from installing this piece of equipment, which is maybe $500, but they couldn't start up that particular section of the plant because of an issue with something temperature related. And so, whenever you are delaying a unit startup, it's called critical path. And it's like the two most feared words in the industry because all eyes are on one specific thing that is a choke point until you can go start the unit up or continue along with the project. Like this has to happen before everything else can happen. And so those are always positions you don't want to be in, critical path positions. But for this particular instance, the solution, the customer called us and they were freaking out. They were like, well, how long is it going to take to get a solution fixed? How long is it going to take to get the right thing out here? We can't cut away our steel structure just to accommodate something simple as this. But the salesperson that fielded that phone call, I mean, they take one look at the picture, they talk them off a ledge, first of all, and they say, hey, we'll come up with something, send me some photos, FaceTime in the plant, or, I can be out in Louisiana tomorrow. Right. And so they ended up coming up with a solution that was really simple for the salesperson. It's, hey, we'll use a flexible system, and instead of having it mounted locally here, we'll have it, mounted over here with some flexible lead wire. And in our mind, we see that 100 times a day, and it's easy fix. It's something very easy to fix. But being able to convey that confidently and knowing instantly, the salesperson knew right off the jump, hey, that's the solution. That's what we're going to do. And boom, it translated to an immediate sale. Maybe the dollar amount wasn't hundreds of millions of dollars, but in the customer's eyes, it allowed them to get something that following day, and allow for unit startup to delay some of those multi-million-dollar delays. So, that's one in about 1,000 examples that come to mind about a concrete way that our salespeople have an immediate impact on a job that 1,000 people's eyes are on, right? And those are the highly pressurized situations where you don't necessarily, you don't want to be in them, but when you are in them and you come out the other side with a solution, your value in that company's eyes, that customer's eyes, has skyrocketed. They no longer think about the issue. They're like, that guy solved my problem, and now I know anything temperature related, I can call that guy and get a fix. And so if you can succeed and exceed their expectations in these critical aspects and even small aspects, they're going to trust you in the larger aspects, right? For hey, we're doing a big plant, you help me out here. Here's the support, right? And so that's kind of a concrete way in a very small but very practical way that our salespeople have involvement with customers. And I can tell you, each of our 20 plus salespeople in our organization, they have instances like that every single day where they can come up and be the solution person for them.
And so let me ask you a very basic question.
Sure.
Why does temperature matter?
Okay.
You got stuff thrown through a pipe. I mean, I can imagine, you're talking about maybe having multiple sensors in a pipeline or along some sort of processing process. What's the big deal?
Well, the industry, rightly so, is extremely focused on safety. Above all, from making, where they're in it to make money, but these plants, they have hundreds of direct employees and they have thousands of contractors that are coming in and out of the plant every single day. And the stuff that they're running through this process, it can be high in H2S content, which is extremely lethal to people. Depending on the chemical plant, or maybe they're making acid. There's certain units that have hydrofluoric acid in them or sulfuric acid, right? So there's some particularly nasty stuff that in terms of if it gets out, if it's not controlled, you can have a serious issue, not only to people's health, but also to the environment. And so maintaining safe temperatures or knowing the temperature where you expect it to be is a critical point that you don't have in one instance that I'm going to think of in a reactor application. Depending on if it's an exothermic reactor, a catalyst bed, there's process going through, it's superheated, it's highly pressurized. You want to control that reaction to a certain temperature, right? To make sure, one, that you're controlling the reaction at a safe level, and also that you're making whatever product you're trying to make, right? You're efficiently using that catalyst. Now, if it's possible that you can have a runaway condition, I'm not going to pretend to be a chemical engineer, but the reaction could just keep happening and happening and happening. Every time that reaction happens, it's firing off some energy, some kinetic energy. So you can have a hot spot created, for lack of a better term, that can grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's superheated. It could be 800 degrees where it's actually 1,000 degrees. And if you don't have a temperature sensor in that particular location, you may not know what's going on in that reactor until it's too late, where you have a failure of the reactor wall because of a hotspot runaway or an exothermic reaction that you can't control. Or maybe you have a temperature system fail that's linked to a safety shutdown system. And if that temperature sensor fails, if it's not reliable, then the entire unit depressurizes, right? And that can be a significant event, not only to people around, but also financially as well. So safety is probably the key critical aspect on why you have this temperature data point. It's one of the refiner or the operator's only control points, their feedback loop into what's happening. Because you'll think about some of these reactors or some of these fired heater applications, they might be the diameter of your room. You're talking about 20 feet, right?
Huge, yeah.
And so a temperature sensor can read, in a radius of 24 feet or 24 inches around it. If you don't have enough temperature sensing points, you don't know what's happening inside that particular application, right?
Yeah, until something fails or whatever. So it's your lead indicator. We can't put a window on these things, so we put a temperature sensor and it lets us see what's happening.
That's an excellent way to think about it. It is your eyes into whatever application you're looking at. And some are more critical than others, for sure. Like, process line temperature measurement, if it's for monitoring, We just kind of want to know generally what's going on in there. Oh, we expected it to be 300 degrees. It's 300 degrees. Okay, cool. Now, for certain applications, if it's not for monitoring, if it's for control, then actually the folks that are at the control room that are pulling the switches and altering the levers, the temperature is how they base their decisions on how to run the unit that day. So let's say, for example, a lot of the temperature sensors fail and they're essentially having to run blind. They're going to throttle back how they run that unit, right? Which is effectively going to, harness a lot of their effectiveness and their efficiency in making money. And if you to put it in context, for certain applications, they may only have the opportunity to do maintenance on these units or on these sensors every 5 years or every 7 years, maybe even 10 years. So having a system that can, hey, we're going to put this in, and then I will come back in 2 presidents later and decide, hey, we can do work. You need it to be reliable, right? So the temperature is a super critical piece, not only for safety, but also for control, for monitoring. And then when you're designing anything, you don't want to have to be replacing it every single time. You don't want to live with just the cost of constantly having to replace these items. So having something that's reliable is extremely critical to these operators and their overall efficiency of the unit. So yeah, why temperature? If I had to boil it down, it would absolutely be safety first, because you want to make sure that the stuff that's supposed to be in the pipe and in the reactor stays in the pipe and in the reactor, so you don't have any harm to the folks at the plant that are working around it, as well as to the environment. Right, all that stuff is very tightly controlled, and so our temperature equipment is extremely linked to that whole effort.
What's the funnest project you've sold into?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what I would say would be, so we were involved with the reactor multi-points for the ExxonMobil Beaumont Blade project. Exxon has really cool acronyms, but Blade, basically what it did, it converted the Beaumont refinery to the largest refinery in the nation. So I think it put it over 600,000 barrels per day in capacity. So that's when they're firing on all cylinders. And so we were involved in that project with the reactor multi-points that are associated with the new crude unit that they put in. And so that was really fun to be involved with. One, because I had been calling on the Southeast Texas area, ExxonMobil Beaumont specifically, for years leading up to that project. And that sales effort not only involved myself supporting the site locally, but just to give you some context for the amount of people and players that were involved. So I was the salesperson for ExxonMobil Beaumont local. We had a counterpart that was the sales for the actual fabricator of the reactor itself, based out in, I believe it was South Korea. We had a salesperson there. We had a salesperson that was supporting ExxonMobil Beaumont at the corporate level, up in the Woodlands or up in Spring. We had a salesperson that was responsible for the fired equipment that was being built in Thailand. And they were all on site, direct meeting with all these people. And then lastly, we had a person that was supporting the engineering company, one of many that was involved with doing all of the design work for that mega project. And I felt cool that I was part of it because we had this sales team on the daily side of thing kind of working in symphony, right? To coordinate, hey, well, we're bundling, this with this. We need to make sure that ExxonMobil's interests are being presented and maintained at all levels of these parties that are involved. And it was really cool to see it all come together over a multi-year long process. And then it kind of culminated with the actual, okay, the reactors are here. We're ready to put these multi-points inside. And I remember they asked me to come lead they called it a readiness review. And you went to this place called the Blade Village, which is basically like all these portables they have on site. And, I had the ExxonMobil representatives in this meeting. I had the contractor representative in this meeting. I had safety. I had a crane operator. I had folks from the catalyst company. I had folks from the internals. I had folks from maybe 20 plus parties involved with this reactor project. And they're like, okay, get up and give a presentation about the multi-points and everything associated from the safety of putting them in, what they are, how to put them in, spare part contingency plans, detailing really technical questions about what's the best way to rig up this assembly with the crane so we fly it up so it doesn't break. What's the installation timeline going to look like? Okay, how are you going to mitigate these risks? We were installing these in June in Beaumont. It's 1,000 degrees. We're inside the reactor. It's super hot. How are we going to mitigate dehydration issues? What's the manpower going to be allotted for this project? And they're looking to the salesperson to explain all of that in a really competent way. And I really enjoyed, I gave this 1.5-hour presentation with this team and we're fielding questions and, it's great. I'm in the zone, I'm loving it. And then afterwards, the main contact that was kind of shepherding me through the process of getting everything set up was like, yeah, that was probably the best readiness review meeting that we've ever had. And I was like really blown away. And, I'm glad he said that, not just toot my own horn, but, I had preparation for that meeting. I had slides ready. I spoke with all of our sales team to get all the pertinent details associated with that project, compiled. I was ready for any sort of question, but I had a huge team supporting me. But that was a cool project to be a part of, not only because of the global impact, the regional impact in my specific sales territory, but it was also cool just to see everything come together and see how much of a true team effort it is to support some of these global projects. And we're talking about just the temperature instrumentation scope. There's 1,000 other instruments that they're putting inside these units, but we really want to be the experts and view ourselves as the experts for this particular aspect of instrumentation. And being able to convey that was something I was really proud to do. And it was really rewarding to see the plant come together. It's online and they're running, everything's working. So that's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Good. Well, I think I have one last question, which is, so after, we've been talking about this area and the different details involved and different aspects of it, but if you had to boil down into a sentence or two, what is technical sales? What does it mean to be in technical sales? Realizing that, it's different somehow than, I guess, non-technical sales, regular sales,
Yeah.
So what is it that makes technical sales?
In my point of view, when you're coming in with a technical sales perspective, the first order of business or your first mindset when you're communicating with this customer is what you need to truly listen to what they're saying in terms of what are their headaches or what problems are they insinuating at by the course of your conversation, and be solutions oriented first. Don't necessarily concern yourself with, oh, this is going to be a giant quote or this is going to be a giant commission, right? That's all secondary stuff. If you're doing the upfront stuff right, giving them a technical solution and establishing that they can trust you in terms of that what you're talking about, you're credible, and you have that confidence and that understanding, that capability. The quoting stuff, the sales stuff, the commission, the sales stuff is going to come kind of secondary, right? It's going to be, hey, I have this solution for you. This is what the best technology is going to look like for your reactor. Would you like a quote for it? And they're like, yeah, I guess I have to get a quote for it based on everything you said, what it's going to allow me to do, how it's going to fit into my system. It's going to be totally within spec. Yeah, let's see a quote for it. Instead of leading with the business side of like, hey, we're X amount of partners. I can give you this % discount of this technology. That has a lane for sure. And you have to be skilled and have those conversations when it's appropriate. But the technical sales, what kind of sets you apart in my mind is being solution oriented, but actually truly understanding and actively listening to what the customer is saying in terms of what problems are they experiencing and what headaches they're maybe dealing with. A lot of our biggest opportunities have come from you're giving a presentation and someone offhanded makes a remark like, oh yeah, we're used to that failing. And you say, well, let me talk to you about that afterwards. And you're like, well, why is it failing? How often is it failing? And then saying, oh, it's in a coker furnace. I was just in one yesterday. Here's what I saw. And they're like, that's what I saw. Right. And having that technical knowledge just built up over time and the training that we give you, that's going to really help set you apart, in my opinion, from other technical salespeople. And then just when I think of technical sales, that aptitude comes to mind.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. I mean, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. And I think this is going to be good information to get in front of the students and whoever else. And
sure.
We're just trying to let people know what these opportunities look like, because there's so much in the industrial space and in the engineering space that most people never see.
Yeah.
We see life insurance salespeople, we see car salespeople, we don't see, these massive enterprises that affect our everyday lives constantly, and we just don't know about them. So this has been a great conversation, I'd say.
Yeah, thank you. We truly, like I said earlier in some of our conversations, where we like to view ourselves as a small hinge that swings a big door. We're working with these global refining and petrochemical counts day in and day out, and are a trusted partner for them. And we feel like the sales positions that we have available are truly highly coveted and sought after positions because of the impact you have, not only to the customer, but also to the company. And then personally, you have a huge opportunity to grow and have a real impact. So it's a lot of fun. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it definitely is rewarding in the right ways.
That's it for this interview. I hope you got something valuable out of it. Of course, if you did, be sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.